The book of Genesis tells us that by the point at which the human race had spread over the world, the biblical God decided that humans could no longer live more than 120 years. Before this, there were stories of Adam's descendants sometimes living up to or even over 900 years of age. But soon after making this decision, chapter 6 of Genesis tells us that God bore witness to the wickedness of man, or had at least grown tired of it, and began to regret having created mankind at all. In Genesis 6:7, God states, "I will wipe out these people that I have created, and also the animals and the birds, because I am sorry that I made any of them." However, God declares that he is pleased with one single entity, a man named Noah. In 6:9 through 10, we learn a bit more about Noah, in that he has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and that it's understood that Noah was at one with God, possibly one of the only people left in the world at the time who gave him appropriate worship and lived in a way in which God intended. Everyone else, though, was evil as far as God was concerned, and that evil had spread everywhere. He proceeds to tell Noah about his plan to end the human race, and gives his justification for doing so as the world being full of violent deeds committed by man. He advised Noah to build a boat for himself out of good timber, and to make room inside of it before covering it with tar inside and out. He gave specific measurements about the boat, noting it should be 133 meters long, 22 meters wide, and 13 miles high. He then told Noah to make a roof for the boat, and to leave 44 centimeters of space between the roof and the sides. He then declared that everything on earth will die, but that he makes a covenant with Noah. In Genesis chapter 7, he tells Noah to go into the boat with his family, as he is the only one in the world who does what is right. In 7:1, he then instructs Noah with a seemingly impossible task, to take 7 pairs of ritually clean animals, but only 1 pair of each kind of unclean animal. It's unknown how Noah would have known what type of animal was clean or unclean, but it's assumed that God would have given him specific instructions, given that Noah does not appear to request information. In fact, Noah doesn't appear to request anything, and goes through with most of God's plan without uttering a single word. Some of the clean animals, according to Leviticus 11, where God tells Moses and Aaron what is clean and unclean, indicates that animals that chew the cud and have a divided hoof were clean, which could include cattle, deer, goats, sheep, chickens, doves, ducks, and even some insects, including locusts and grasshoppers. Unclean animals, however, included animals that did not chew the cud, and who did not have a split hoof, such as pigs, dogs, cats, horses, donkeys, and rodents. Interestingly, some birds, including owls, hawks, and vultures, were considered unclean as well. In fact, reptiles and amphibious creatures were also decided as being unclean. But again, it must be assumed that God told this to Noah, though it is never detailed in Genesis just how Noah knew what was clean and what wasn't. God then tells Noah that in 7 days he would send rain that would fall for 40 days and 40 nights, and that by doing so, he would destroy all of the living beings that he had made. Noah is noted as doing everything that the Lord commanded, as I mentioned earlier, and he does not have a single word to say in defiance of this bold plan. He simply obeys. By the time the flood came to the earth, Noah is stated as being 600 years of age. He, his wife, and his sons and their wives all went on board the boat. On the 17th day of the 2nd month, all the outlets of the vast body of water beneath the earth burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened, and rain fell on the earth for 40 days and nights, just as God had promised. It appeared that Noah had completed his quest set by God, in that every kind of animal, domestic and wild, large and small, were now residing in the boat with them. God then shut the door behind Noah, and the flood continued for 40 days, until the water became deep enough for the boat to float and rise until it was as high as the mountains. Genesis chapter 7, 21 through 23 rather ominously confirms the deaths of every living being by saying, every living being on earth died, every bird, every animal, and every person. Everything on earth that breathed died. The Lord destroyed all living beings on the earth, human beings, animals, and birds. The only ones left were Noah, and those who were with him in the boat. It would take a further 150 days for the water to start going down. Eventually, the water was no longer a threat, after Noah tested a few times to see if it was safe outside, by sending out birds to see if they could find a place to land. Once the birds stopped coming back, Noah knew the water was gone. Eventually, when Noah was 601 years old, implying he was on the boat with the animals for an entire year, God tells Noah to get out of the boat and to take all of the animals with him so they can settle into the new world and begin to repopulate. Once outside, Noah built an altar to God and took one of each kind of ritually clean animal and sacrificed them by burning. The odour of this pleased God, and he is noted in Genesis 8:21 as promising never to put the earth under such duress again, as he states, "Never again will I put the earth under a curse because of what people do. I know that from time to time they are young, and their thoughts are evil. Never again will I destroy all living beings, as I have done this time." In Genesis chapter 9, God blesses Noah and his sons and tells them to have many children, so that their descendants will live all over the earth. He also decrees man as being superior to animals, stating that animals will live in fear of humans and that they are under human power. He also grants his blessings for humans to eat them, as well as his blessings for humans to consume green plants. The only exception to this rule appears to be in Genesis 9:4, where God states that the one thing you must not eat is meat with blood still in it. He states, "I forbid this, because the life is in the blood." He goes on to say that if an animal kills a human, that animal will meet with death. This is true for humans killing humans too, in that murderers will in turn be murdered. Later on in this chapter, God tells Noah that he is placing his bow in the clouds as a sign and a promise that he will never destroy the world again. He declares in Genesis 9:14 through 17, "Whenever I cover the sky with clouds and the rainbow appears, I will remember my promise to you, and to all the animals that flood will never again destroy all living beings. When the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between me and all living beings on earth. That is the sign of the promise which I am making to all living things." Noah and the flood serves to show believers the extent of God's vengeance, that he is able to destroy all that which he has created if he is irked. It gives believers a glimpse of God's power, in that he effortlessly brings forth the rain, filling the earth to the brim, vanquishing all which he chooses to. You might say that it allows people to see the consequences of what can happen if they are not loyal to God, or do not live righteous lifestyles. They might also see Noah as a role model, or an example for which to live by, as Noah is spared by God. It also shows us that the biblical God is not sentimental, and does not fear destroying that which he has created. By this, Noah and the flood also serves as a cautionary tale, that life shouldn't be taken for granted, and that just because one has gone unchecked for sinful behaviour, the biblical God sees all and records all, and won't hesitate to destroy the entire world if he has to. By this, it allows some believers to consider what God might do to just one individual who irks him if he is capable of destroying life in the way that he did. But even in this tale, the biblical God shows mercy, albeit to an exclusive club. He obviously spares Noah, but he also allows Noah to take his family with him. In a sense, this may give believers more motivation to follow their Lord, because not only will he spare them from his wrath, but he will also spare their loved ones. Mercy is also shown to the animals of the world, in that God wishes to continue their existence by having Noah bring a pair of them into the new world. Contrarily though, it's also equally true that the animals who weren't brought aboard the ark likely suffered as they drowned in the flood, thus showing the mercilessness of God, and that he holds no reserves with the killing as he works to fulfill his plans. There exists a very similar tale of a flood destroying the world in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh. Much like Noah, it details a hero who is chosen to save himself, his family, and a collection of animals by building an ark and holding out against a flood that is brought upon the earth by the gods. It virtually is the same story, with the hero building a vessel to his god's instructions, all the way down to the exact measurements. He loads the vessel with all the animals in the field, and boards with his family after receiving confirmation from his god that the calamity was about to begin. The hero even sends out birds to test if there is land outside to settle on, much as Noah did in the biblical tale. This hero even ends up giving a sacrifice to his god once the flood has ended, much as Noah does. Fragments of the Book of Gilgamesh exist on tablets that date as far back as 2000 BC, leading skeptics to believe that the biblical story of Noah and the flood is merely a tale derived from the Sumerian myth and rebranded as its own. There are those that interpret God's promise never to destroy the world again as something of a ploy, and that his promise is disingenuous. The reasoning for this is that they believe God is testing man to see how far he will push his newfound immunity, so as to see whether or not man will betray and disappoint him once again. Others believe that God genuinely will not bring upon the calamity again, as he gave Noah his word, and even set up some failsafes to remind him not to destroy life again in the form of his bow. But that doesn't mean he would stop mankind from destroying the world itself, which you might say is certainly happening around us. By this logic, if the biblical God wanted to destroy life again, he really doesn't need to implement much of his own power, nor does he need to risk breaking his own promise to Noah, for humankind appears to be willing to see to the destruction of the earth all by itself. Some believe that this is the only reason God made the promise at all, not because he felt bad or felt compelled to restrain himself for bringing about such devastation, but because he suspected we'd end up bringing about the devastation ourselves.